everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited for today's video because, drumroll please, I am doing my February wrap-up. Woo! Now, February wasn't the greatest reading month for me because I only read 6 books, which is a lot less than I was reading last year in February, but that's okay. I'm trying to prioritize reading when I actually want to read, and when I don't want to read, not forcing myself to. So, the first book on this stack is Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana, and this book was so insane. I gave it 5 stars. It was my first extreme horror, and it definitely did not disappoint me. There's a lot of stuff that I was like, kind of really shocked at, but it was so good. Such a well-deserved 5 stars, and I think it was my favorite book of February. Now, I read this from the 28th of December 2022 to the 2nd of February 2023, and it took me so long to finish it because, as you can see, it's a pretty short book, and I was annotating, and when I annotate, I annotate, so it took me a while because of that, and because I never wanted it to really end. I wasn't ready for it to end, I just wanted it to keep going, and so yeah, that's why it took me so long to read it. But there are a lot of trigger warnings for this book, so please go look those up before you read this. I'm not going to recommend this to anyone unless you read a lot of horror, because there's some things in here that are very messed up, that are very triggering, and I just want you guys to go into this fully aware of those things. There was no animal mutilation though, so we're safe from that, because that's one of the hardest things for me to read about, and this book doesn't have any, so we're good. Yeah, I gave this 5 stars. It was beyond epic. I want to read more extreme horror now because of this, but this has also set such a high bar that I don't know if any other extreme horror books will truly measure up to how good this was, because it was also very well written. And there's a lot of flashbacks, and there's chapters that are letters between our 2 main characters, so that's also very interesting, and the story is complex and so layered, and that's very hard to do when you have such a short book, and Christopher Triana achieved that so effortlessly. So yes, this was a 5 star, one of my favorite books of February. Actually, it was my favorite book of February, and I can't wait to read more extreme horror. Alright, the next book was Kill Creek, and I listened to the audiobook from Audible. I'm gonna put a picture right here somewhere. And I gave this 4.5 stars. This was another horror. I loved it. I love reading about the haunted house trope. I never get tired of reading that. It's one of my favorite horror tropes to read. And this has such a unique spin on a haunted house that I couldn't give it anything less than a 4 star, and it didn't quite get to 5 stars for me just because there's just something missing. I couldn't tell what it was, but it just didn't have that 5 star feeling for me. But everything else in this book was truly amazing, and I loved how detailed the author was, so truly detailed in describing the setting and his characters and what is going on, and I just have never read that detailed of a book in a very long time. And at one point I was like, how is this going to be as long as the audiobook is? And then as I was reading, I was like, that's why, because he describes everything, the most minute details that I would never even think of, being well, what about this? He was like, let me just describe everything for you so you can perfectly picture everything. That was crazy. I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the alternating points of view, as well as how there actually wasn't that many. Okay, that's really confusing, so let me clarify. There were different points of view, which gave it a nice, well-rounded picture of the story, but also it was the same point of views repeating over and over, so it never got too confusing. I really liked that. And I read Kill Creek from the 3rd of January to the 10th of February. It did take me a while because with my audiobooks this year, I'm going to be listening on 1x speed, so that I can truly enjoy the story and truly absorb everything, because I was listening on 2x speed, and I felt like I was just missing so many important things simply because the speed was too fast. So that's why it took me so long to finish this, but 4.5 stars, would definitely recommend. Again, make sure you check trigger warnings because there are some things in this book that we should not go into lightly. One of them, I think, is mentions of sexual assault, mentions of abuse, mentions of alcoholism, all that stuff, and you know, you tread lightly. But it was a very good book, and I do recommend it for anyone who's a horror fan. The audiobook as well, fantastic. Love the narrator. He did such a good Irish accent at one point. Very good. All right, the next book is City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, and I gave this book 4.5 stars again, and I read this from the 4th of February to the 13th of February, so I actually finished it a lot faster than I thought I would. I think I would have finished it sooner too if I just hadn't have been so busy with work and stuff, but this was a chunker, and this is also for a vlog where I'm going to go into more detail about my thoughts then. But there was also just something missing from this book that didn't make it quite a 5 stars. I think the romance was one aspect of that, because in the beginning I was really confused about why the romance was there. It didn't really seem like it was fitting into the plot line, and that got resolved later on in the book. I was much more happier with it later on, but at first I was kind of like, okay, why is this here? But this was very well paced. It's very easy to understand for being high fantasy. Sometimes high fantasy can just throw you into the world and be super confusing, and this book was confusing, but everything gets explained throughout the book, so eventually all of your questions get answered, which at first I did not like, but then after I finished the book I was like, okay, I really like this. So 4.5 stars. I will definitely be continuing the trilogy. I hope to actually finish this trilogy this year, since there's only 2 other books that I have to read, and also because this one ended on a massive cliffhanger, and now I need to find out what happens. Alright, the next book that I read was actually called Eloise Asylum. I borrowed a copy of this, so I don't currently have it with me, so I'm just going to put a picture right here. I believe the full title is Eloise Asylum, The History, the Humanity, and the Haunts. And this was written by Cassandra St. Croix, and I give this a 3 stars. I felt like it focused too much on the history and the humanity instead of the haunts, and I really read it because I was wanting to hear all about how Eloise Asylum is super haunted. That's really what I was looking for, and it just did not deliver. There was also some other things about the book that did bother me, such as the author kind of placing blame for women getting pregnant at the asylum on the women instead of considering the whole situation as it was. And maybe some of those pregnancies were consensual, but I feel like based on history of other asylums, those pregnancies most likely weren't consented to, and those women were probably assaulted. So that one really bothered me, and I felt like she empathized with the doctors and the nurses, which is good because I'm sure there were plenty of good people working there, but at the same time I've heard other stories from other people about how horrible that place was and how horribly people were treated, and she did not even really mention that, which kind of upset me because I know that place has a record of treating a lot of people very badly, so that did upset me. I finished this from the 14th of February to the 16th of February, so I read it in about 2 days, and it's pretty short and there's a lot of pictures, which is the only reason I read it so quickly. But yeah, so 3 stars. It was an average book. It was well written, and I loved looking at all the photos. That definitely made it more interesting. But I just wish that the author had shown us more of the hauntings and included more stories of people's experiences there. Alright, the next book is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And again, this is for another vlog that I'm going to put up hopefully soon. I still have a couple more books to read for that. But as soon as I finish those, I will then work on getting that vlog up. And I gave this 3 stars again. And I read this from the 16th of February to the 23rd of February. I did enjoy how short the chapters were. That really makes reading fantasy much easier for me. Long chapters tend to make me not want to finish a book as quickly because it just feels so long and drawn out. But I also had quite a few issues with this book. Here's what I did like. I liked Kel. Kel as a protagonist was an amazing character. He struggled with doing bad things for good reasons, and he was morally gray in some parts, and in some parts he was very clearly the good guy. And I really liked that balance of showing him in his worst moments versus him in his best, because I felt like that made him a true hero. Because to me, heroes are people who don't always do good things. Sometimes they do bad things for the right reason. He was amazing. I loved the lore around Black London. That was awesome. I kind of wish that they had gone to Black London in this book, because that was something I was super looking forward to and I thought would happen, and it didn't happen. That's okay. Hopefully they go to Black London in another book. That would be great. And, you know, the real issue for me was Lila. I just did not like her as a character. I felt like on her own, she was an amazing character, very well-rounded, but as soon as she teams up with Kel, she becomes a little weird for me, and I don't know why. I feel like V.E. Schwab didn't put as much effort into her character as she did Kel's, and I did not like that. So, yeah, this was about what I expected it to be. I didn't think it was going to be a very high rating, just because some people who have the same fantasy taste as me have rated this book as 3 stars or lower. So I figured I was going to be 3 stars, but there were some really great parts about this book, but again, there's just some stuff that I did not vibe with. So V.E. Schwab is a pretty mid author for me. It looks like the only book I've really liked from her has been Gallant, which I think is her young adult book, so I guess her adult fantasy just doesn't really do it for me. But yeah, I think that means I need to try City of Ghosts, because that's her middle grade fantasy, and I think if I like Gallant, I would like that better than her adult fantasy. Alright, and the last book is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I gave this 5 stars. It was so good. It was such a quick read too, which didn't bother me. And, you know, I like that at the end they didn't go into full detail at what happens at the end, because I think that would have been really hard for me to read. I like that it just kind of cuts off and, like, you know what's going to happen, but you don't have to read about it. I read this book from the 4th of February to the 27th of February. I really just procrastinated reading this. I don't know why, because it was such a good book, and it really sucker punched me with how in your feelings it gets, and you know, the grief and the rage and the guilt and all of that are emotions I've experienced when watching someone I've loved pass away very slowly, and that's a very hard thing to deal with and to understand. And I feel like this was a very healing read for me as well, in learning how to and seeing this young boy cope with his emotions and start the process of healing. It was what I needed in the moment. I did cry reading this. I cried towards the end. So beware of that. This book is also very sad, and again, there's some very heavy topics in this book, even though it's meant for a younger crowd. So please go look up trigger warnings, because some of the stuff in this book can be very hard to deal with, and you know, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that before picking it up. Alright, so that is everything I read in February. It's a pretty good mix. Some bigger books, some smaller books. I'm very happy though, because all of these books were actually pretty decent. And this month I had higher ratings than January, so yay! Alright, that is it for this video, and thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!